here we are for another episode of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is episode number 116, being recorded on Saturday, June 15th, 2024 at 1:01 p.m. I almost said July. Good thing I didn't. On a beautiful summer day. Truly a sight to behold out there. I stepped outside for a bit, and it's not quite too muggy out. It's a beautiful kind of breeze in the air. The sunshine is painting the roads. It's painting all the greeneries around. It's just such a beautiful and wonderful sight and feeling. These summer days really allow us to be at one with ourselves and our own creative works. We have to kind of be completely focused in how we choose to spend these days, because now that people are in this weather, more willing to go outside, they're going to want to socialize, and they're going to want to drag you down in their lives and do what they want to do. And it's important for all of us to really be focused and really be at the forefront of how we choose to live our days, whom we choose to associate with, what projects we want to work on, how we want to spend these precious days, minutes, hours, years, weeks of our lives. There's no such thing as free time. That is complete nonsense. There's only time, and it's what we do with that time. If you have 30 minutes and you have nothing planned for those 30 minutes, then that is 30 minutes that you have to be completely alert in choosing what you want to do, whatever that may be, whether it's working on your art, reading, taking in art, going outside for a walk on a beautiful day like this. It's all up to you. It's all about being at the center of your life and being just completely focused and intent on what it is you hope to achieve with these days. Is there going to be a time later this year? It's going to be winter. I can't wait for that. I mean, I can wait for that. I'm not counting down the days. That's insanity. Every day is so precious and it's such a gift. But in the wintertime, we're all going to be inside more often, and people are going to want to stay inside as well. And that gives us a great opportunity to really focus on our own work. But we want to make that a year-round sort of intention. We don't want to just make it seasonally. The entire year must be focused on our goals, our dreams, what we want to do with the time that we have. You can't sit around and wait for something to happen. You must make it happen. And you can't sit around and fear of the end and being like, oh my gosh, I only have a couple hours left of the day. I only have a couple years left until this or X, Y, or Z, or God forbid you say, oh my gosh, I'm already however old I am. I only have so and so many years, months, days left to live. It's like, brother, we have no idea how long we're going to be here for. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be next week. Could be next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So that's why we're here now. If you're listening to this, then God bless you. You did it. You made it. You're still alive. Now, what are you going to do with your life, man? That's only up for you to decide. Whom are you going to socialize with? Whom are you going to help pursue their dreams, their goals, whilst, pursuing your own? If somebody's like, man, I'm making this film. I need actors for this film. I need you to help me out with this. I need you to act in this film. Are you going to help them out with that? Are you going to help them pursue their dreams? Or if they're like, if they're like, I want to go and I want to stare at the wall for 5 hours. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to go and stare at a wall with them? You kind of have to pick and choose your battles and ultimately find out what it is that you want to achieve. And it's such a beautiful time of the year. It's such a beautiful time to go outside and go for a walk, take in some reading. Beautiful reading weather. Say that 5 times fast. Beautiful grilling weather. I've already done that this year. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful time of the year. And it's also a great time to be kind of taking in specific art, whether that be kind of getting in the summer mentality of your reading, of music, of film, of anything of the sort. Whether you know it or not, you sort of kind of, at least I found myself sort of adjusting to the art that I'm taking in, sort of the music that I'm taking in, and the literature in somewhat of ways, but more so in kind of where I'm reading it, sort of taking in these beautiful summer days while being engrossed in a book. It's just so wonderful to be here. I'm still kind of trudging forward with that great John Schlesinger book. It's just so great so far. And it's great to come back to a book like this and kind of put into context of what films you have and haven't seen, and to go from there as well. Midnight Cowboy, is always talked about as a great New York film, but in a way, it's a great summer film as well, at least for a while of it. I know there are parts of that film, especially when it gets to the cold, where you have great sequences where you really kind of feel the scuzziness of Ratzo's apartment and the lack of heat. But there are just some great scenic kind of walking shots outside of people outside these great marquees and great storefronts and at the cinema. It's just great, man. There was a great website that I had came across that I want to actually get the name of right here because, funnily enough, I had this exact idea for this website. I was like, that'd be such a cool idea to put this all together. And I may have to actually pause it because I don't know what the name of the website is, but it was my exact idea, and I said, wow, that's so great. If I can't find it, then I'm not going to spend all day on it. Yeah, I can't find it right now. I'll have to come back to that after the fact. Because I'm not going to pause and try to spend 5 minutes looking at it. But anyways, it's great to watch those films and see the different marquees of other films in it. It's always great to kind of point out, see what films are playing at the time, and see what kind of got a big release and what didn't. It's just completely great, man, being aware of film set in certain settings like that. But on the contrast of that, going from the big city to somewhere small, somewhere intimate, let's talk about Gus Van Sant. Wonderful filmmaker. He's been with us for a while, has made some brilliant films, is one of the great filmmakers of our time, and has just produced myriad kinds of films. It's so fascinating to look at his filmography and take a step back at the different eras of what he was making, starting off early on when he was... let me get the list down here. He had done his feature film debut was from 1986, a film called Malinois, which I have not seen yet, so I can't speak on that. Many of his films still need to be seen, but I kind of trace it back to his the first film of his that I had seen, or at least the earliest film of his I'd seen, which was also one of his best, 1989, is Drugstore Cowboy with Matt Dillon. A wonderful look at a couple of criminals, Matt Dillon and Kelly Lynch. You also have, what was it, Heather Graham in that film, I believe? Yeah, Heather Graham and James the Gross. Great film. And then he would follow that up in 1991, my favorite of his work, the absolutely brilliant, just one of the best films ever made, My Own Private Idaho, starring River Phoenix and Keanu Reeves. A brilliant look at these two friends and their nomad sort of life and their journey of, I like what it says here, journey of self-discovery. It's a brilliant film. It's truly one of my favorite films ever. But we're going to be talking about his 2005 film, one of his films I've been curious about for quite a while, Last Days, starring Michael Pitt. And Michael Pitt as well is an actor who I always sort of forget how much I enjoy him. I enjoy seeing him in films. I know he was on that show Boardwalk Empire, which I've not seen. I've said before, I don't watch television, but I've heard very good things about that show. I think he was one of the main characters on it. Actually, I don't know, or maybe he wasn't. I'm really not sure, to be honest. But he was definitely a prominent part of that show from what I've heard. But I always remember him from myriad roles. One of his most memorable being in Michael Haneke's remake of his own film Funny Games. He plays the main antagonist of that film, Paul. It's such a great, menacing role. And that's a very interesting remake in its own right. Interesting with Michael Haneke's idea to do a complete shot-for-shot remake of his own film. A film that he actually, I didn't know previously, had originally intended to make an American film, but was unable to, so he made that originally elsewhere, and then decided to eventually make it in America. But anyways, yeah, he was great in that film. I always remember him as well from Bernardo Bertolucci's The Dreamers from 2003, starring him, Louis Garrel, and Eva Green. One of Bertolucci's strongest films, a later era film of his, this menage a trois of a relationship taking place in the late 60s in France with these three lovers, with Eva Green being the center of it all. Very well done. Anyways, but my point, I'm getting kind of sidetracked here. We're talking about Last Days here. Last Days stars Michael Pitt playing this character, Blake. And while it's never outright said, this is meant to be a somewhat fictionalized. I say somewhat, and I'll get into that in a bit, but a fictionalized version of the last days of Nirvana's frontman and guitarist Kurt Cobain, very famous pop culture icon there. And it's always interesting to kind of take a true story like this and see how much you're willing to bend the realities of a situation. Because what I love about this film is kind of one of my favorite. What I love about this kind of film that Gus Van Sant does, because I would say following up with My Own Private Idaho, my other favorite film of his is 2003's Elephant. And it's an interesting kind of comparison between Elephant and Last Days, not just strictly in how both films are made in a stripped back format, whereas Elephant is far more, I believe, either first time actors or actors who only would do this film. But with Last Days as well, it's a different sort of thing. You have Michael Pitt, who's already an established actor at this point. Oh, of course, I also forgot to mention. I apologize. Jeez Louise, man. We get a sip of this. But Michael Pitt as well, from Hedwig and the Angry Inch. A great musical as well. It's been a little while since I've seen that film. Let's do for a rewatch at some point. It's a very good film. So you have certain elements that are the same. These are just general comparisons that I thought of with these films. Not necessarily. I mean, I know this is part of his tetralogy of films with these two, Paranoid Park, which is also very good as well, and the other film, which I don't remember, which I actually is the only one of these that I haven't seen of his tetralogy. Let's see. Jerry, Elephant, and Paranoid Park. That's right, Jerry from 2002, which I have not seen yet. But in terms of, and this, I think, feels, I mean, it works in that sort of stripped back element of all three of these films. I think Paranoid Park as well actually had a lot of first time actors in this. But what I'm talking about with Elephant and Last Days is that you have these two films that could easily become exploitive, especially when it comes, these are two films about, at its core, centered around a violent act. In Elephant, that being the different perspectives of a school shooting, and in Last Days being a Last Days of Kurt Cobain, a suicide. But what's interesting with both film is that the violence is so secondary to everything else. In that, I think these are taking not just more respectful roots of that. I mean, Elephant is not directly lifted about the Columbine story, but from what I can remember, I think certain specific elements from the true Columbine shooting were about that. But it's not as if it's doing a retelling of that, or not a retelling. It's not even doing a version of that. That's just the basis of it. But it's taking more of the human parts of these stories, where the violence is so secondary and isn't exploitive. It's matter of fact, or it's not on screen at all. The way that a film that I always kind of had a problem with, but is a very good film in its own right. And I was talking to an acquaintance about this, and we disagreed on it, but ultimately it was a good conversation. It was Patty Jenkins' film Monster from 2003 with Christina Ricci and Charlize Theron. And that's a film that I always kind of had a bit of trouble with, because that's based on the true story of serial killer Eileen Wuornos, who was a prostitute, or I think she was a prostitute or a former prostitute, I don't remember, it's been a little while, who was killing these men. Well, okay, she was prostituting herself and killing these men. And I think what kind of always troubled me about that, although it is a very good film, with two great performances by Charlize Theron and Christina Ricci, is that because it's a true story and it's telling a true story, is that for one, Eileen Wuornos was a very unreliable person. She was very, before her execution in jail, her stories changed frequently. The narrative wasn't very consistent, and I'm not an expert on the case or anything like that. I watched that documentary, and I knew a little bit about the case, so I'm going off that as well as mixing the film. But especially when it comes to situations where the only people who know the truth are dead, in this case being that her victims, we don't totally know what exactly went down. And it's one thing with taking liberties for the sake of a narrative, and it's another thing where you're kind of making up a narrative, and that's a film that I always kind of felt odd about, because it's not portraying itself as a fictionalized version. That's why I have less of an issue. I don't have any issue at all in terms of a film like this, or more of a controversial film, Blonde, which people are very divided on. But I think I don't have a problem with that, because that's a fictionalized retelling of certain events, and that's sort of the conversation right there. Actually, I did talk about that film more a year ago or so, but this film is doing it much more tastefully. It's following this character Blake in his last days as he wanders through this mansion. He has his friends there. He doesn't have a whole lot of dialogue, but he wanders about. We get a little bit of backstory, a little bit here and there. If you didn't know this was a Kurt Cobain story, or the story of him being the catalyst of this, you can still draw enough that this is clearly a famous musician. He's got a guitar hanging around. He's got a drum set. There's a point early on when there's a call that comes through where someone's talking to him about these tour dates that he's going to get in trouble if he doesn't do, and he's very blasé. He seems to be either on drugs or he's out of it. I mean, truthfully, I'm not super familiar with Kurt Cobain as... I mean, I know Nirvana, the band. I know, a handful of songs, but those who are more knowledgeable can provide more insight into specificities of Kurt Cobain's personality, of his final days being in this house. I don't know if he had people there as well. I don't know the specificities of it. But this film, by taking a quieter, more sort of not as speculative, not as glamorous look into somebody who is clearly very troubled in their own right, who is kind of drifting through life, who just happened to have... I shouldn't even say just happened to, obviously, Kurt Cobain has put in the time and effort and has reached a pop culture sort of status icon, much in the same way as Elvis Presley or a Marilyn Monroe of just being, or James Dean, of being a larger than life person, where they have now been elevated to this almost this beyond the superstar status, almost kind of mythic status in a way. Kurt Cobain being, I would say, maybe the most recent, most contemporary of that, because he has passed away. And he has, Nirvana are this kind of bigger, larger-than-life sort of pop culture entity. But what Gus Van Sant does is he really brings it down, which I think is which is the perfect kind of way he could have went about this. Because what I'm talking about with this film, An Elephant, is that much in the same way that I talk about a lot of filmmakers who are slower paced, is that they're not as concerned with the audience and whether or not they are on board with it or not. I can't remember if I talked about this when I was talking about The Turin Horse by Bela Tarr, is that I enjoy filmmakers who are not interested in what the audience thinks, who are interested at going in their own pace. That's why when I say I look at filmmakers like Bela Tarr, or I picked up on Verasuitical, who are not, they're okay with having very long takes, where the shots will go on for 4, 5, 6 minutes with seemingly little happening. By allowing you to get into the mood and allowing the moment to set, they are less concerned with the audience sitting there being quote-unquote bored. In the same way, a lot as well, one of my favorite films, The Brown Bunny by Vincent Gallo. People have very strong opinions on positive or negative, and I happen to have very strong opinions positive, which is a film that's great for discussion. People are very passionate about that film, and Vincent Gallo, positive or negatively. That's how you engage in good conversation, is by opening yourself up to different thoughts. But these films as well, that you must allow yourself to sink into, to be in the mindset. This film and Elephant, and even Paranoid Park, are not concerned with the violence. They're not concerned with the big spectacle. They are concerned with these characters and being with these characters. And even with something like Elephant and Paranoid Park, because you have a lot of first-time actors in that, and while you could say the acting may be choppier in that, I think that adds a strong sense of realness in its own right, where it does feel stripped back. It does feel, you start to question how much is improvised, how much is there. And I remember Paranoid Park having some questionable acting, but I also think that a film like that, it works for that style. It's interesting kind of to compare Gus Van Sant to somebody on a bigger scale in terms of the films he was making, but in a lot of ways a similar kind of feeling to someone like Steven Soderbergh. Now, Steven Soderbergh, of course, has done very, populist, very big films. He did the Ocean's trilogy, which I've never even talked about on the show. I watched those, all three of them, back to back to back for the first time last year, and what a fun, enjoyable trilogy of films, man. I guess I might be biased because I've said before I love heist films. I love films set in casinos. I love films about gambling, which is funny because I'm not a gambler. I don't like going to casinos, but I love films I love Croupier. I love California Split. Of course, Casino was a classic. Hard Eight's a very good film, so I love films like that. But he does films like that, but then he'll do really, really good, interesting films like Bubble, which is totally stripped back, and something earlier like Schizopolis, and I just love filmmakers who take these just total career shifts and just do different things, and Gus Van Sant has that to an extent. I mean, he did some quote-unquote, I guess it's completely subjective how you say bigger films, but he did like Milk from 2008 with Sean Penn, which I've been wanting to rewatch. I think I last saw that in 2008, 2009. I probably saw it in 2009, actually, exactly, that came out in 2008. But then he did like Good Will Hunting, and he did like the Psycho remake. So like bigger quote unquote bigger films, but these smaller kind of more personal film. Not even personal, but it feels personal in the sense that there's not this big spectacle. And even one of his recent films, Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, which has bigger actors, and it has Joaquin Phoenix and Jonah Hill, Rooney Mara, Jack Black. I think that's one of his. That's really up there for me. I really, really love that film. But and I know he's done that. That was the last feature film he did. He did some episodes of that show Feud on FX, which I think was the Bette Davis one, to my knowledge, like Bette Davis and. Or maybe not. I think that might be a show that has different seasons, or has different stories per season. I'm actually not sure. Yeah, okay. It says an anthology series centering on famous feuds, including Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, and Truman Capote and the New York Elite. Okay, so I don't know what season he did, but either way. But I was just completely engaged with this film, I think, by allowing yourself to sink into the film, to be with Michael Pitt for this period of time, that when you get to the third act, while it is the big event, and I think one that maybe people were probably, I imagine, cautious at the time of how they're going to handle a sensitive topic like this, much in the same way of a sensitive topic portrayed in Elephant, the way that Gus Van Sant goes about it, and I'll let you see the film for yourself to see how he handles it. It's done very tastefully. It's done in a way that there is real care and respect, but at the same time looking at this from an outside point of view of not this idolizing situation, which is kind of what I was talking about a little bit in a situation. I remember when the Elvis film came out, and while I enjoyed it for what it was as being a jukebox kind of big bombastic musical, even with Priscilla, which is a film that I like quite a bit as well, I think both films, especially the film Elvis, I look for something more personal with the idea of this icon. So that's why, I'm still looking for that film about Elvis that really is about the person, not the idea. And I would love to see even Gus Van Sant do a film like that, or a type of film like that. Maybe not strictly a film like this where, it's very, very long takes, or, just long takes, little dialogue, but I'm saying something more humane, something more kind of down to earth. I think that's what Priscilla had, which I like, that film I do like, even though it didn't totally work for me, but I think it does kind of have, it never fully reaches in, but it does kind of show that complexities of someone like Elvis as a person who could be very, because I've read a lot about Elvis. He was a very complex person, and I think there was a lot more there than I think people are willing or have this idea of. He wasn't, he was, from everything I've read, he was hypocritical, and he could be very cruel, but also was very caring, and he could be very, kind and very there's a lot there. That's why I kind of like these films about these kind of icons, and John Wayne as well, somebody who I think has always kind of been unfairly painted as somebody less complex than he actually was, and I think that he as well. There's a film that could be very much made about a very strong film made about him, and it was great reading that John Ford biography. that really kind of delved into the complexities of him as well. I think there's so much to be handled with here, and when I look at a film like this by Gus Van Sant, that it is about this kind of big pop culture icon, but the way that Gus Van Sant handles these topics, I find it so endearing. And actually, funnily enough, it was great to see him pop up in The Canyons from Paul Schrader. I know I talked about that film a little while ago, but it was like, oh, it's great. Gus Van Sant's popping up in this film. And actually, he's the voice on the phone in this film, which I didn't even know. I was looking at some of his other acted works here, and I don't remember him in Paranoid Park. He has a small role as guy reading newspaper. So that'll have to be rewatched in due time. But yeah, give his filmography a look. Gus Van Sant truly is one of my favorite filmmakers. He still has a couple of his films I got to see. What I was saying before, Malinoche, I need to see. What else was I got? To Die For, actually, just got a 4K Criterion, so that'll be picked up undoubtedly. The Psycho remake, except I think he did one of the segments for Paris I Love You, so I forgot he did Restless. That's right, the Mia Wasikowska film. That'll be seen at some point. But either way, yeah, keep an eye out. He's done plenty of great films. This was an HBO film, so I watched it on Max. And I think it does help because I don't really have any sort of attachment to Kurt Cobain, or I don't really have any attachment to the music or Nirvana. I think the music is cool and all that. I've never been a big fan, not in a way that I disliked it. I've just never really delved into their discography. So I guess I have that going for me, where I am able to separate myself from any kind of truth or not. But I think it is important that even if you are a big fan of the music, or a big you are very knowledgeable about the story, that I think you could still be able to separate yourself, or you should be able to separate yourself, because this is a fictionalized look into somebody very isolated, somebody who I get is very discontent with a luxurious lifestyle. He sort of, I get the idea of somebody who's just judging from this film, maybe he kind of like spun out and is not interested in this lifestyle. Everybody is coming in and out of this house. They're having parties, they're going out somewhere. There's one great scene in the film that really kind of stuck out, is when he's in this bedroom, and there's like a 7 or 8 kittens kind of hanging about, sort of just hanging around, and he just lays in bed, and he just is petting this kitten. And the way it's shot, it's a great kind of a shot kind of looking up. It's a very kind of quiet, intimate moment. And a lesser filmmaker, I think, would have some ridiculous dialogue, or a filmmaker who is told, you must make this for a wide audience. So therefore, the amount of films I've seen where a character has to tell themselves what the audience to tell themselves what they're feeling, so the audience knows. I watched a film recently where a character literally has to tell himself what he's feeling at that moment, and it's a film that I think is fine and all that, but there are so many parts in this film, and I won't say what it is, where the characters are constantly telling the audience what they are feeling, and it's just ridiculous, man. It's the same thing I criticize when films explain their message to the audience. I find so shallow and stupid. I've just so many films that, in case you missed the message of this film, the character will explain the message so nothing is lost. We cannot have any ambiguities. The audience must be in tune with this film. And then you have filmmakers like Gus Van Sant who are just like, no, we're not doing this. This is a film made for adults, and we're gonna treat them as such. That's what I was talking about with, and I don't even want to shade films. I really hate even doing. But that's what I talk about with the Oppenheimer and Barbie. It's just two films that treat their audiences very differently in terms of respect and nuance. But that's completely subjective. You may agree, disagree. That's what makes. I hope I can at least turn you on to the thought of discussion, or the idea. Perhaps you're listening to this and you go, Dan, I disagree with your assessment on these films. I don't find merit in these films, or vice versa, and that's your right. That's your prerogative. But I hope it at least sparks some sort of thought, more so than just this film was good or this film was bad. I hope that people kind of get something out of discussion with acquaintances whose opinions they trust. But that's completely up to them. It's a beautiful day outside, guys, so don't waste it. Work on your art. Go back. Work on whatever you need to. Be focused. Be content. Be intent. and just really seize the day, man. I know I could. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it. I've got to go out later, and let me tell you, man, it's gonna be so joyous to be just seeing all those cars with the windows rolled down. You know, they're listening to some good stuff. They're listening to music, podcasts, or maybe just the beautiful nature outside. It's just a beautiful, beautiful time to be alive. Thank you guys so much. I'll be back next time. Until then.